just me, or do the majority of games released today just not feel special? There's so much cross-pollination between games these days that you can take the latest in a long-running franchise and compare it to its progenitors, and you barely see any similarities, but you can look at other games that are released around it, and you'll see numerous similarities. Now, change isn't inherently a bad thing. You'd be hard-pressed to find any game that nailed exactly what it wanted to do on its first outing. But it seems like developers take sequels as an opportunity not to refine what made a game great in the first place, but as an opportunity to add new features or new mechanics that made other games great. If I had to guess, this sounds like a publisher-driven mandate. Chasing trends, making games feel like other games that are more successful, all that sort of stuff. And sometimes it works out. But a lot of the time you just end up diluting what made a game great in the first place. The game that originally sparked this thought for me was Fallout 76, for obvious reasons. It's basically just Fallout 4 but with a multiplayer survival game shoved into it at the expense of everything that makes a great modern Fallout game great. Or Fallout. That sounds like an exaggeration, but hear me out. Pretty much everything in a Fallout game exists in the menus. Even the combat to some extent because of the prevalence of the VAT system. But in a persistent online world, you can't affect the game speed around the player. You can't have time stop while they look at their Pip-Boy to see their stats or their inventory. You can't slow down time while they use VATs to pick their shots. Hell, anything that forces you to use a menu, from crafting to conversations, leaves you wide open for attack, which is probably why there aren't that many conversations to be had in Fallout 76. So the combat, the crafting, the UI, the RPG elements, all of it's sort of tarnished by having to be an online experience. And unfortunately, that just doesn't feel like Fallout. By trying to jump on the multiplayer survival bandwagon, Fallout 76 basically takes everything that makes a great modern Fallout and dilutes it. 76 looks like a Fallout game. It sounds like a Fallout game, but it doesn't feel like a Fallout game. Which is crazy to me because Fallout has been through a fundamental shift with its mechanics before. When Bethesda took it into the first-person space, Fallout could have easily become an action RPG, and it sort of did. But there was a compromise made to bridge the gap between the isometric turn-based RPG that it used to be and where Bethesda wanted to take it, and that was VATS. Now, you can argue on whether or not that was enough of a compromise, but I think it maintains the spirit of those classic Fallout games. Between classic isometric Fallout and modern first-person Fallout, there is definitely a fundamental shift, but they have the same feeling, and I think that's what matters. But not every instance of gaming homogenization is as egregious as Fallout 76. Look at Mirror's Edge Catalyst, for instance. I reviewed that game back in 2016, and I said it was good, and I stand by that. But I think elements that were brand new to the series in Catalyst diluted what made Mirror's Edge 1 so fascinating. Mirror's Edge 1 was this tight, focused experience where you had linear levels with set challenges, and you could approach those challenges a number of ways, but they were all sort of accounted for. There was game-breaking stuff that you could do, but even without breaking the game, there were usually a couple of different ways to deal with any situation, and that was meant to happen. It was intentional, it was tight, and it was great. Catalyst, on the other hand, takes these levels and scatters them across a small open world, and also adds a skill tree which locks off a lot of advanced techniques that you could use from the start of Mirror's Edge 1. My first instinct is to say that these elements were added to pad out the game time, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. You can have games that are way too short that don't feel worth the price of admission. But the open world that you're going to spend about 80% of your time in doesn't feel engaging or interesting. I mean, obviously, right? In a linear level, you know which way a player is coming from. They can only attack obstacles at so many different angles, and so you can account for that. But in an open world, you need obstacles to be surpassed from any different direction with any set of skills, and the skill tree makes that even more frustrating because you won't have advanced skills coming into the open world traversal until late in the game. But I get it. I get why open worlds, skill trees, multiplayer systems, I get why all of these things make their way into different franchises that never had them to start with. Developers and publishers, mostly publishers, want broader audience appeal. And what's more appealing than a game that's worth your time, that has extra stuff? What's more appealing than a sequel that does more? But is it worth potentially diluting a game's personality or removing it entirely? Maybe it's crazy of me to say, but with the benefit of hindsight, I actually really miss a lot of early entries in Ubisoft franchises. Now, I promise I don't mean for these videos to all devolve into Ubisoft bashing, even though the last one did a little bit. But the way their games are built these days is the best example of what I'm trying to talk about here. Every game feels the same, with the same massive maps, the same varieties of collectibles, and the same endless busywork, and you can sort of trace all of this back to Assassin's Creed 2 and Far Cry 3. Now, don't misunderstand me, these games are great, and they might be some of the most fun to play in their respective franchises, but they feel less unique. They feel less like their own special thing than the entries that came before them. Assassin's Creed 1 was hyper-focused on one thing: assassination. Every mission in AC1 was built around getting more information on your target and building a better assassination. But then Assassin's Creed 2 came out, and while I won't argue that it's the more fun game overall, it didn't have the same focus as Assassin's Creed 1. Where the first was an imperfect game that focused entirely on getting information and killing your targets, Assassin's Creed 2 introduced seemingly endless bullshit to do around the main mission. And the main story was fairly linear. Nothing you did outside of it affected your assassinations within the main story. But there were collectibles, 3 different types in fact. There were courier missions, there were races, there were brawls. There was so much extra stuff. The game might have played better and it had a larger variety of stuff to do, but it lost its focus, and that would get worse and worse as the Assassin's Creed series went on. After Assassin's Creed 2 was such a huge success, the early Ubisoft formula was then transplanted and expanded upon in Far Cry 3. Far Cry 2's oppressive African warzone where everything you did furthered the main conflict, or furthered your bonds with allies, or got you weapons and malaria medicine to stop you from, dying, was succeeded by this tropical playground where you had enemy outposts to take out, radio towers to climb, and other endless bullshit to do. As well as a new skill tree that made you feel like a complete badass by the end, whereas in Far Cry 2 by the end, everything still felt dangerous. You were just getting better at the game, hopefully. Like Assassin's Creed 2, I won't argue that Far Cry 3 is potentially the more fun of the 2 games that I'm talking about here, but in retrospect, Far Cry 2 was far more memorable. It was much more of its own thing, Is it just because every Ubisoft game now has practically the same structure and the same layout? Perhaps. But I don't think I'm wrong in saying that Far Cry 2 and Assassin's Creed 1 had their own different character, their own different spirit. They were focused. They knew what they wanted to deliver. They were sometimes clunky and inconvenient, but they committed to that, which I find admirable at the very least. Most importantly, they weren't trying to be all things to all players. And I think that's really the crux of the issue. Publishers pushing for the games under their umbrella to draw more audiences in, while they become more and more generic. Unnecessary multiplayer elements, endless side content, skill trees, these are all things that are designed to give you more game, and people want value for their money, right? Nothing's going to draw a player in like knowing that the game is going to be worth the money that they're spending on. And for better or worse, a lot of people equate time with value, so there's no getting away from that. But as the saying goes, less is more, and I think that's pretty accurate a lot of the time. I'd love to see a world where instead of publishers pushing for these games to broaden their demographic and be all things to all players, developers were just allowed to make games that were distinct and unique and had their own feeling. But obviously all of this is dumb because some of the money isn't all of the money, and publishers want to make all of the money, so fuck me, right? But it's a nice thought. Let me know in the comments below what games you think were diluted by sequels over time, and what games you'd love to see come back to their roots. In the meantime, I'm Josh the Tophat Gamer, and I will see you next time. Peace.